What if I told you that the greatest danger to humanity is not a lack of intelligence, but a silent collective form of mental pollution, capable of turning brilliant minds into accomplices of their own destruction? Imagine it, a renowned scientist spreading lies, a respected professor supporting hate speech, a loving father putting his own children at risk, not out of malice, but out of stupidity. But this isn't the stupidity you imagine. We're talking about an invisible force that transforms clear-thinking people into puppets of the system. This is what Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran theologian, witnessed during Nazi Germany. He didn't see monsters, he saw neighbors, colleagues, spiritual leaders turning into instruments of evil through a kind of functional stupidity. And the most disturbing part is that this is not happening out there, but right here with people like you, like me. It's a theory so unsettling, so precise, that understanding it might be the difference between keeping your mental freedom or becoming another cog in the machinery of those who profit from your alienation. When we think of stupidity, we usually picture someone with low intellectual capacity, a caricature of obvious ignorance. But that image is a comfortable disguise. The stupidity that truly threatens freedom is much more subtle, insidious, and above all collective. It does not live only in individuals, it inhabits systems, expresses itself in automated behaviors and truths. Nobody questions in rules, everyone follows without knowing why. Stupidity at that level is not a personal defect, it's a sociological force. It acts like a virus that silently spreads through culture education institutions, and once internalized, it turns common sense into an invisible prison. People stop thinking not because they can't, but because they no longer need to. Society thinks for them. What's normal becomes their compass. What's accepted becomes moral. The everyone does it becomes justification. And the most terrifying part, this stupidity is functional. It serves to maintain order, stability, and above all, power. People who question too much are dangerous. Thinking too much slows down the system. The machinery needs obedient parts, not restless souls. That's how the ideal citizen for any regime is shaped. Democratic, authoritarian, or corporate. Someone who consumes votes, shares, and gets outraged, but only within allowed limits. Someone who believes thinking is having an opinion, even if that opinion was implanted by an algorithm or a TV host. The result, a mass of individuals who believe themselves critical, but who actually only perform a script they never wrote. A society where stupidity is not the exception, it's the structure. And anyone who tries to escape it is labeled arrogant, conspiracy theorist, or excessively radical. But therein lies the true danger, when stupidity stops being seen as a defect and starts being celebrated as a virtue, when questioning becomes aggressive, when deep thinking is interpreted as elitism. That's how a generation is molded that knows everything except how to think for itself. In 1943, locked in a Nazi prison cell, Lutheran theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote a series of reflections that today sound almost prophetic. Arrested for conspiring against Hitler, Bonhoeffer no longer saw evil as the main danger of his time. What he perceived was even more devastating stupidity as a morally active and socially accepted force. Bonhoeffer observed around him ordinary people, educated, religious, well-intentioned, becoming accomplices of a murderous regime. Not because they were evil, but because they had lost their capacity for judgment. They obeyed, they believed, they repeated, and if someone questioned it, was they who pointed the finger, not the soldiers. He wrote, "Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than malice. Against malice we can protest. It can be exposed and stopped by force. Against stupidity, we are defenseless." That phrase was not rhetorical exaggeration. It was the diagnosis of a system where thinking had been outsourced, and with it responsibility. Bonhoeffer saw professors defending Nazi doctrines, doctors participating in inhuman experiments, citizens denouncing Jewish neighbors not out of deliberate cruelty, but because they had become unconscious agents of the regime. They didn't kill, they just believed in the ideas of those who killed. And the creepiest part, they felt proud of it, because within the collective logic of their time, they believed they were doing the right thing. The stupidity Bonhoeffer denounced was not clumsy. It was obedient, And when obedience allies with deactivated intellect, the perfect stage for totalitarianism is created. That is the core of his theory, stupidity as a moral choice, as the surrender of individual conscience to the comfort of dominant narratives, a surrender that once given turns anyone, no matter how intelligent, cultured, or sensitive, into a useful part of a destructive machine. Bonhoeffer was executed a few weeks before the war ended, but his theory survived not as a cry against the past, but as a key to understanding the present. Because what he saw in 1943, Germany lives on today in prefab speeches, in outsourced thoughts and certainties no one dares to examine. And the question he left us was not, are you good or bad? It was, are you still thinking? Bonhoeffer did not just offer criticism, he offered a theory and perhaps a curse, because after understanding what he meant, you can no longer look at the world the same way. According to him, stupidity is not a cognitive failure. It is an ethical condition, a state in which a person stops being the author of their own ideas and begins to act under external commands, believing they act of their own free will. It's not about IQ, it's not about access to information. It's about an internal disposition to think, and that disposition disappears when the individual renounces critical judgment in exchange for belonging, security, or convenience. Bonhoeffer perceives something devastating. In times of crisis, fear, and instability, humans tend to take refuge in systems that promise order. And for that order to work, individual thought must be anesthetized. They're the perfect citizen for any authoritarian system is born, obedient, convinced, and incapable of understanding that they serve something they don't comprehend. That is the root of his theory. Stupidity in that sense is not passive, it's militant. The stupid person not only believes they defend, they repeat, they persecute those who think differently because they believe they are saving the world. They don't need proof. The authority of whoever gave the order is enough. And here comes the most disturbing part. Intelligence is not an antidote. The truth many times is just a tool. The stupid use to justify their beliefs. Sophisticated discourse, biased references, selective use of logic, everything can be used to reinforce an idea that was never deeply examined. That is the most dangerous stupidity, the one with degrees, the one that speaks eloquently, the one that receives applause, the one that writes columns but deep down doesn't think, it only repeats. And the louder its echo, the more convinced it is of its lucidity. Bonhoeffer was right to fear that force because it can turn entire societies into fields of voluntary obedience, where those who dare to think are considered crazy and those who follow blindly virtuous. That's why this theory is so uncomfortable, because it doesn't point to the other. It points inside each one of us. Bonhoeffer's theory, born from ethics and history today, has support in the most advanced psychology and neuroscience. What he intuited in 1943, science confirms with disconcerting clarity. Let's start with the Dunning-Kruger effect. Perhaps the most symbolic. According to this phenomenon, the less a person knows about a subject, the more confident they are in their opinions. Ignorance does not generate doubt, it generates certainty. The incompetent do not perceive their own limitation. And precisely because of that, they become loud, dogmatic, intolerant. But the explanation doesn't end there. Classic social conformity experiments like Solomon Asch's in the 1950s demonstrate how group pressure leads people to deny even what they see with their own eyes, just not to stand out. In one of these experiments, a group participated in a very simple visual test to identify which of three lines matched the length of a reference line. The correct answer was obvious, but the participant didn't know the others were coordinated to deliberately give wrong answers. The result, over 70% of participants at some point deliberately chose the wrong answer, just to fit in. Solomon wrote, "The tendency to conform with the opinion of the group is so strong that many prefer to be wrong along with others rather than be right alone." That experiment reveals an uncomfortable truth. The fear of being excluded from the group is stronger than the impulse to be right. The need to belong, not to stand out, not to seem strange, can lead intelligent people to abandon their own judgment. That is exactly what Bonhoeffer feared. Not stupidity as ignorance, but as active conformity. Adding to this is confirmation bias, a cognitive flaw, where people seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms their beliefs and simply ignore the rest. The internet is paradise for this bias. Algorithms deliver exactly what the user wants to hear. The result, an infinite mirror of certainties, each locked in their own bubble, feeding their stupidity with personalized data. More recently, neuroscience studies show that when a person faces information that challenges their beliefs, their brain reacts by activating the same areas that light up during physical pain. In other words, thinking differently hurts literally. That is why many prefer the simple comfort of repetition over the uncomfortable effort of reflection. These discoveries only confirm what Bonhoeffer already feared. Stupidity is a predictable, programmable, and highly exploitable form of human functioning. Systems of power, advertising, propaganda, and technology have learned to use these mechanisms masterfully. The average citizen is not manipulated by accident. They are manipulated because that's how we function. And the more they believe they are immune, the more vulnerable they become. Science confirms it. The fight against stupidity is not a war against ignorance. It is a war against the surrender of thought, against the impulse to conform, to follow, to simplify. Thinking is biologically costly, socially risky, psychologically painful. That is why it is so rare and so necessary. Another experiment that validates Bonhoeffer's intuitions is the famous obedience experiment by Stanley McGrimm, conducted in 1961. McGrimm wanted to understand how far an ordinary person would go when instructed by a legitimate authority, even if it meant causing harm to another person. The results were chilling. 65% of participants delivered potentially lethal electric shocks to another human being just because an authority figure told them to do so. They sweated, trembled, hesitated, but obeyed. Even when the victim screamed, even when it seemed they were about to faint. McGrimm concluded, the essence of obedience consists in a person seeing themselves as an instrument to carry out another's wishes and therefore not feeling responsible for their actions. This experiment not only validates Bonhoeffer's theory, it stages it. It shows that ordinary people with no sadistic traits can collaborate with evil simply because they externalize their conscience. Not because they are bad, but because they stop thinking. And the most disturbing thing is that those volunteers were neither fanatics nor monsters. They were ordinary citizens, teachers, housewives, engineers, people like you and me. Stupidity, then, is not the absence of intelligence. It is the absence of active moral conscience. It is following orders, believing in authorities, repeating speeches without judgment. And when that becomes the norm, any atrocity can be legitimized with phrases like, "I was just following orders." Contemporary stupidity is not an accident. It is a product, it is a project, and it is working perfectly. We live in the era of mass distraction. While you watch this, there are companies, platforms, and algorithms measuring your attention, time, your emotions, your clicks, and adjusting, in real time, what you see, what you feel, and what you gradually come to believe. Modern stupidity no longer needs dictators. It has interface designers, content creators, likable influencers. It does not impose. It seduces. The logic is simple. The less you think, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you are, the more manipulable. And the more manipulable, the more profitable. This equation governs everything from your social media feed to political speeches designed as slogans. The system does not want you to think, it wants you to react. Look at social media algorithms. They prioritize what generates emotional engagement. Fear, anger, moral outrage, emotions that shut down analytical thinking and ignite herd instinct. The result, millions of people defending causes they do not understand, attacking enemies that do not exist, commenting on conflicts they cannot even explain. And it's not just technology. The machinery of stupidity also includes an education system that teaches memorization, but not questioning. A press that pretends pluralism, but repeats the same script with different tones. A culture that turns every disagreement into hate speech. Entertainment that exchanges complexity for instant gratification. It is a system that rewards those who shout, but silences those who think, that idolizes opinion, but demonizes critical judgment, that turns any deep analysis into elitism, arrogance, or lack of empathy. We are surrounded by social engineering that promotes stupidity not as failure, but as an ideal behavioral model. The distracted, polarized, reactive, and emotionally unstable citizen is the perfect customer, the perfect voter, the perfect employee. And the question arises, one that Bonhoeffer would approve of. How many of your ideas are truly yours in a world where superficiality is celebrated, the silence of doubt becomes scandalous, questioning becomes provocation, and thinking becomes a radical act? Radical because real thinking requires courage. Having an opinion is not enough. You must dig until opinion dissolves, until there are no certainties, only harder questions, that scares, that isolates, that costs. The true thinker feels the weight of standing outside consensus, the anguish of suspecting that the majority is wrong. And maybe you are too, the loneliness of not fitting into any ideological box, of not having a cheering crowd, of not receiving easy applause. But thinking today is also a subversive act because it challenges the logic of the machine, because it slows down the feed's pace, because it demands pause, silence, contemplation. Everything. The system hates everything. The market does not monetize everything. Politics does not tolerate. That is why the thinker is seen as a threat, as arrogant, as uncomfortable, as someone out of touch with reality. Because thinking dismantles narratives, and narratives are the food of organized stupidity. But there is something even more disturbing. Thinking today is not only difficult, it is dangerous. Have you noticed how certain ideas cannot even be mentioned without the crowd reacting as if it were a crime? Have you realized how the righteous discourse has become a new moral tribunal, where there is no room for nuance, context, or ambiguity? We live in a time when the greatest heresy is independent thinking, where thought has become transgression, where the search for truth has been replaced by the need for social validation. And resisting this has a price. You will lose followers. You will be misunderstood. Maybe canned, you will be lonelier, more restless, more uncomfortable. But you will also be free, authentic, unbreakable. Because when you reclaim your autonomy of thought, no one can chain you again. Bonhoeffer understood this from prison. He knew thinking was dangerous, but he also knew not thinking is fatal. And now you know it too. You have made it this far, and that already puts you outside the average, because this content is not easy. It does not give quick fixes. It does not offer you an external enemy to hate. It points at you at the place where the most effective stupidity usually hides, the comfort zone of your mind. What Bonhoeffer left us was not just a warning, it was a choice. He showed us that stupidity, when it settles in, does not need weapons. It only needs silence, repetition, unexamined, good intentions, and good people who become agents of evil, unknowingly, simply because they stop thinking for themselves. And what do we have left? We have resistance thinking, questioning even when it makes us unpopular, especially when it makes us unpopular. Rescuing thought is no longer a virtue, it is an act of intellectual survival. Because in these times, maintaining lucidity is an act of disobedience and critical conscience. The last free territory in a society that has even commercialized your mind. So the final question is not whether you understood Bonhoeffer's theory. The real question is, are you willing to pay the price of remaining lucid in a world that rewards stupidity? Because now you know, and knowing has a price. But there is something more dangerous than paying that price. Pretending you did not hear this call. Going back to sleep with the illusion that you are still the one thinking. Awakening is uncomfortable. But staying anesthetized is the real risk. Do not hide. Do not return this awareness. It is yours. And maybe it is the only thing you truly have left. If this message resonated with you, if it made you think, if it made you question yourself, then don't leave it there. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video with someone who is ready to wake up, because free thought needs echoes, and you can be that echo. If this message resonated with you, if you felt something within you awaken, don't stop here. Subscribe to the Being of Knowledge and become part of a community of silent strategists, of awakened minds who no longer fall for masks. Like this video if it brought you clarity, and share it with those who also need to open their eyes. Because true power begins with one decision: to never be the same again. Thank you for watching.